welcome into It's Just Wrestling. It's been a while. It's been like almost a year. I guess I should feel a little bit bad about it. Now, if you are watching on YouTube or Facebook or X and you're like, hey, who the hell is this guy? Why am I still subscribed to this channel if it's been a year? I have good news for you. The show is coming back, and it's coming back each and every week. You'll be able to find it live on YouTube, X, and Facebook every single Thursday morning at 8:30 a.m. I know it's been a long time, so I owe you a slight apology. Now, the last time we spoke, it was Wrestle Dynasty. It was a long time ago. It was Swerve versus Samoa Joe in the main event. I think it was April of 2024. So, okay, it's not been a full year, but we're pretty damn close. And I'll tell you what, if you go back and you watch that episode, or you go back and you listen to that episode a little bit, you know what you're going to find? A lot of predictions that ended up coming true, not necessarily the outcomes of the matches, but like some of the concerns that I may or may not have had, okay? Some of those big concerns that I had about AEW, especially, they certainly came to pass. Now, 2024 was a big year, and we're not going to go back and recap each and everything that happened in the wonderful year of 2024 in professional wrestling, but we are going to take a look at some of the things that ended 2024 and why I'm feeling significantly more excited about 2025. And I have good news for you. If you're like, oh, hey, Russ, question for you. Why should we care? It's pretty simple. I have a feeling that 2025 is going to be a good year. Now, it's obviously going to be good for WWE because you would pretty much have to have a lobotomy at this point if you were Triple H and that booking committee to not have a good 2025. But there's like part of me that feels like, I don't think you can ever restore the feeling in AEW. Okay, now in fairness, I was a day one AEW fan, and I really loved the fact that AEW was bringing something different and something gritty. And in a Vince McMahon-led WWE, it was very hard to get on board with the product at the time. And so this idea of, I don't follow any of these people from New Japan. Who is Kenny Omega? What does he do? Oh, Omega versus Jericho. That's interesting. Oh, there's Dean Ambrose showing up at the first pay-per-view. Wait a second. What's that? Oh, his name's Moxley now. So if you go back, which you can now do through Max, which I actually did on New Year's Day, I went back and I watched that main event because, there's part of me that was very interested in just feeling what early AEW was again, and then you juxtapose that with where things are at right now. They're starting to get a little bit better, but we all know, and unless you're a psycho or you're a weird fan account that just will not acknowledge reality, 2024 certainly had down moments in terms of attendance, in terms of ratings with AEW. Now, I have put on my pro wrestling fan cap because I think it's important that I draw a line of delineation between, there are people who do wrestling media. Some of them have been on this show before. I mean, they were in can't call it a previous iteration of the show. They were on some of the early episodes. The more I thought about it, I went back and I checked those episodes out before I brought this show back to start 2025. There's like a very distinct line between wrestling media and fans, and then there's like this kind of weird in between. And I find myself in this weird in between because I wear a media hat for sports media. I also maintain some kind of a fan hat with teams that I don't cover. And then pro wrestling is supposed to be the fun thing. It's supposed to be the thing that I look forward to. And for many of you, it may be your number one ultimate escape. You might not like sports, which means that like some of the bobbleheads on the desk make no sense, or some of the stuff behind me makes no sense. Or you might not like the same teams that I do. But guess what? If you are a pro wrestling fan, this is the show for you because I will be as fair as can be when it comes to both WWE and to AEW. Now, will there be times that we'll talk about TNA if something interesting happens? Yes, if I had been doing this show when Tessa Blanchard showed back up with TNA, would I have offered you a lot of thoughts on it? I probably would have. Am I going to now? No. Because the time has passed. If something crazy happens in New Japan, or a talent leaves one company for another, I'll be fair and balanced about it. I can tell you that there were some things that happened at the end of 2024 that had me kind of scratching my head. And now all of a sudden, as we get into 2025, I feel significantly better about. So here are a few things that we're going to get into on today's episode. And if you pay attention to the thumbnails, you pay attention to the episode description on YouTube, Facebook, X, or wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Pandora, wherever you get your podcasts, you will notice that there are really three things that I want to focus in on today. Now, when I do this show live on a Thursday morning, it just so happens that, the re-debut of the show on the first Thursday of the month in 2025. This is not technically a live show. If you're in the live chat right now and you're asking questions, I apologize. It's technically not happening this moment, but it will starting next week. I will be fair. Now, sometimes it will hurt your feelings. If you are an absolutist, if you are a WWE truther, lifer, and they can do no wrong, you might not like some of the things I say. And the same will go with AEW. But I like to be fair. I think that a lot of the internet conjecture and the lobbing of grenades from one side to the other is just wildly off base. Guys, it's just wrestling. I love wrestling. I've been a lifelong pro wrestling fan. But there are more important things in the world. There are life and death things in the world. Pro wrestling's not one of them. If it's your number one outlet and your number one source of entertainment, that's great. But I'm not going to tear you down if you, for some reason, think that the Death Riders is the greatest storyline of all time. It is not. But you can believe that if you want. I'm not going to tear you down. I'll say that it's probably misguided. But I want to get into three big things that happened this week because one is the showdown between CM Punk and Seth Rollins. One is Rated FTR, which we'll kind of talk about the end of World's End and then what happened on Dynamite. And then this Okada and Omega thing that I would argue probably should have ended World's End and really didn't get any kind of meaningful follow-up. Oh, and by the way, Kenny Omega's first match back in the ring after being out isn't even happening in AEW. It's happening 3 days from recording for New Japan at Wrestle Dynasty. We're going to get into all of that. Now, on a normal episode where there's live, I will take your questions, your comments, concerns. We can have a wonderful back and forth. But again, because today isn't technically a live show, it's just going to be me, myself, and I, and my thoughts, and Bucky the bobblehead, and any of these other ones, and this wonderful custom Funko that my wife got for me. I never wanted a Funko. I never asked for a Funko. I never understood the concept of a Funko, and yet she got this custom one made for me, and it's fantastic. It has a coffee in one hand. It has the cell phone in the other, a vest, the shoe. I mean, she nailed it. I will accept this one. This is a wonderful Funko. Do I need to have them for every character? No. And if you have them in your man cave, your she shed, your whatever, by all means, bless your heart. That's great. This is probably going to be the only one I get. Fast forward to the end of the year, and if my whole desk is full of Funkos because I think they're funny, then we're going to have an end-of-year catch-up, aren't we? All right, but let's get into some of the things that happened over the past week in pro wrestling, because the first one that I want to dive into is the one that really sets up where WWE is heading, which, of course, unless you've been living under a rock that has been covered in 17 feet of concrete, you know that WWE Monday Night Raw is going to Netflix. And while there have been other matches announced, really the one that I'm the most focused in on because of the sheer hatred is Seth Rollins and CM Punk. And on Monday, we finally got to see these two go face-to-face and finally start to just exchange some barbs, some things that I've wanted to hear, some things that I've wanted to see. And finally, we got to a point where Seth Rollins and CM Punk both allude to things that are perhaps a little bit personal to them. I'm going to bring them up over here because I feel like it takes you back to Monday. Oh, look at that. See, this is the kind of production value you can expect here at It's Just Wrestling because it's high level. Rollins comes out and he is still wearing a typically flamboyant Rollins outfit, but it's a little bit more buttoned up. We have seen a change in a sense in what Rollins is wearing. It's still flamboyant, but it's starting to get a little bit more buttoned up. Rollins comes out. Punk comes out. They go toe-to-toe. And where everyone expects that Punk is going to roast Rollins on the mic, you finally get to see Seth Rollins go at Punk with vitriol that if he doesn't really hold in his heart, he does a damn good job of faking. All right, so you get a few back and forth barbs. Punk asks about where the man is, hasn't seen the man lately. Eventually, Rollins retorts, oh, she's just taking some time to raise a kid. Not that you would know anything about what that's like. Woo, that one cuts. That cuts deep. As a parent, I don't know how I would feel. I don't think I'd feel very good, even to like one of my worst enemies to be like, oh, you don't know. You don't know what it's like to have kids. No, we don't. I don't know. Does Punk and his wife not want to have kids? Are they incapable of having kids? Have they decided that bringing kids into this world isn't for them? I don't know. I don't know. But it feels like a barb. That feels like a snug attack. So, okay, there's one, but it's only one of many that go back and forth. Rollins has a moment in this promo where he says, you know, you keep saying you were gone for 10 years, which is interesting because we all know that Punk went to AEW, did take a large chunk of change, which Rollins calls out explicitly, doesn't say AEW, but he says you took a chunk of change from the competition. How did that work out? Well, that also alludes to the fact that it didn't end well for Punk. It ended with his firing because Tony Khan feared for his life, but it didn't end well. And there were a lot of people who kind of turned against Punk in that moment. Now, you could make the argument if you want, and I'm not the biggest ratings person, but you could make the argument that part of AEW's quasi-cratering of their ratings in 2024 kind of coincided with the removal of Punk over the course of, a year plus. The removal of Punk, the decision to keep the Elite, the decision to not effectively address Brawl Out, and then eventually it leading to All In, and the backstage issue with Punk and Jack Perry, and also included, and as I'm sure you can all remember, AEW infamously decided in 2024 to air the backstage footage, which I would argue made Punk look like he mostly told the truth, almost gave you the blow-by-blow on Ariel Helwani's show. I didn't understand why they aired the video at the time. I said it on this show. I still don't understand why almost a year later, why they decided to go that route. But we all got to see, all right, there was a physical altercation in the backstage. We know what was reported. We saw Tony Khan go on TV and say he feared for his life. So Rollins throws that barb out. How did that work out? And obviously, it didn't. Now, if you're Punk, and you go off of what Punk had said on Ariel Helwani's show, there is that whole idea of like he wanted to be let go before the collision even became a thing. So in a sense, it kind of worked out for him. He's done huge business. He had probably the feud of the year in 2024 with Drew McIntyre, and now he gets to start 2025. I don't think this is going to be a one-off between Punk and Rollins, but now he gets to go right back to having a blood feud that started last year and then kind of got derailed because Rollins got hurt, and they did a masterful job of pivoting it to CM Punk and Drew McIntyre. So you get some of these barbs. You get the AEW barb. You get the can't has kids or doesn't have kids barb. Punk throws this idea out there that, like, I didn't abandon the fans. I abandoned you, and that's why you're so upset, because I chose to walk away and leave you behind. So these guys do a great job of getting at one another. And Rollins closes this whole thing with I'm going to bring my heart full of hate and my eyes of fire, and I'm going to burn you to the ground. It was a masterful job on both sides by Punk and Rollins. And like, I don't think you needed these guys to go out it really was the main event spot. It wasn't a match. It was a promo at the end of the final Raw on USA to try to get people through the door, or at least to get them to subscribe to Netflix. And if you're even a casual wrestling fan, you probably see this going around social media and you say, all right, I want to see that. Like, you could be a lapsed fan and you're like, oh wait, the last time I watched, I do remember, wasn't the Shield related to Punk in some way? Oh, is that Rollins guy's the one who hit Roman Reigns with the chair? Punk was gone. Didn't Punk get fired for... Even as a casual wrestling fan who only really consumes any of this stuff through social media, you're probably going, you know what? I want to see that match. I do. And like I said, I don't think this is going to be a one-off. I would actually be very disappointed if this was a one-off. I know that they had laid some groundwork for this before Rollins got hurt last year. I would argue if you were following AEW in Punk's time, one of the best blood feuds they had available to them was Punk and Eddie Kingston. And like one of the best promo battles that Punk has had in years was Punk versus Eddie Kingston on the mic. And Kingston went right at Punk and made him uncomfortable a few times. And Punk went back at Kingston. And I was like, oh, cool. Start of a good program, an extended program. And it ended up just being a one-off match between those two. And I was like, damn, like it leaves a little bit to be desired. Punk and MJF had what I would consider to be easily the best rivalry in MJF's career. And in fairness, my lapsed fandom came around the time that Punk was on his rise to WWE. And I hadn't seen him in Ring of Honor. And so I didn't really have much of a frame of reference with Punk, right? From my vantage point, up until the McIntyre program, I thought that Punk and MJF was the best thing I had ever seen Punk do. It's pretty damn close. Punk MJF, Punk McIntyre, they are very close. For my money, they're both very, very close. And in fairness, MJF, I don't think has ever found a program that has worked nearly as effectively as the one that he had with CM Punk. They're still trying to figure out who the best guy is to line up across from him. You could maybe hope in the back of your mind and your heart of hearts, if you're ultimately just a pro wrestling fan, I like MJF and AEW a lot. Would I like to see another Punk MJF battle between now and Punk retiring? I would. Do I think it's going to happen anytime soon? Well, no, because if you are to believe that MJF re-upped with AEW in 2024, chances are that's a 3-year deal, a 5-year deal. I don't see Punk going back to work for Tony Khan again. So you might never see those two again. But this Rollins and Punk thing can absolutely carry you all the way up to Mania. Like, there could be a way to have these two go at it in the first Netflix Monday Night Raw, and for them to revisit it, for them to continue to have bad blood, and then down the line, you maybe make this a WrestleMania main event. Maybe this is a night one main event. Maybe Punk cashes in that favor with Paul Heyman and somehow ends up with the World Heavyweight Championship, not the WWE Cody Rhodes Championship, but the other one. And maybe Punk ends up with that belt, and who should challenge him at WrestleMania than this blood rival in Seth Rollins? I would be really interested. I would love to see it. And I think, again, if you're a true fan of pro wrestling, there's nothing quite like a good blood feud. And these two have it. So that alone sold me. I was going to watch Raw anyway. Maybe I was going to pick it up on DVR, or not DVR. Maybe I was going to go back and watch it after the fact, because I hate commercials, and it sounds like Raw is going to have commercials. Maybe I wouldn't watch it live. I'd go back on like Tuesday morning or late Monday night. And I will probably skip around different parts of Raw, because not everything on Raw is to my taste. But that match is one that I need to see. And again, I think it's going to set up what will probably be a trilogy. And if this ends up being like a Kingston thing, where it burns hot and then it falls off, I'll be really disappointed. Genuinely, I'll be bummed out, because I feel like there's even more they can go with. I really do. All right, so that was what happened. To me, that was the biggest thing to happen in WWE thus far this week. And it's the thing I'm looking the most forward to. Tribal combat, I don't know. Solo and Roman, fine. Do I feel like it's been built particularly well? Hasn't really done a lot for me. This Punk and Rollins thing, to me, is the best thing they have going right now. If you paid attention to this show in the first iteration, you'll know how I feel about Cody Rhodes. I think Cody Rhodes is a great babyface pursuing from underneath, but once that dog catches the car, I don't think he knows what to do with it. They're doing record business. For my taste, Cody Rhodes as a babyface champion just doesn't work the way that WWE would probably want it to work for me. I'd much rather see a Homelander scenario where Cody Rhodes believes he is the hero of the story, but he's actually a heel. The Saturday night main event thing, where Owens introduces the chair to the ring, but Rhodes is ultimately the one who uses it. Like, start dropping more of those breadcrumbs. And let's get to like mid-2025 if Rhodes is still the champ. Like, let's get to the Homelander scenario that people like me wanted to see in AEW and thought we were going to get in AEW and never did. See, that to me, I think Rhodes could play a very good, delusional heel that thinks he's the face. As of right now, it doesn't feel like it's going that way. And we have a ladder match coming up between Owens and Rhodes that I think is going to ultimately just be Cody retaining again. It just doesn't do anything for me. Maybe that match will be great. Cody Rhodes had a fantastic ladder match for the TNT Championship against Sammy Guevara. So we know that he can do it. We know that he can do a great singles ladder match, which you don't see many of in WWE. I think it's been 2 years or almost 3 since the last singles ladder match for a title. We'll see. But yeah, it's all Punk and Rollins for me. It's the number one thing they have going, in my opinion. Now, number 2 is probably whoever Drew McIntyre wants to destroy next, because the work that he did in 2024 and the hatred that fueled him, that spoke volumes. And that, to me, was the best work he's ever done in his career. So I'm very excited about that here in 2025. Now, I want to push us over now, if it's okay with you. And if it's not, oh well, I'm going to anyway. I want to go over to AEW because, in fairness, like when this show started, it was because AEW had kind of reignited the passion that I had for pro wrestling. Now, if you look at the timeline, it's like, oh, I think the first few episodes were in 2023, and there were some good moments and some bad moments, and then it came back around in 2024, and that was certainly not the best year in the history of AEW. But I have a feeling that this year could be better. Let's start with like some of the positives, okay? We're going to go, because I just did some positive stuff on WWE, and I gave you a couple of things that I'm on. Let me give you a little bit for 2025 here with AEW. The first telecast on Max was fantastic. Visually, it popped. I went and watched Dynamite on Max live, and then I have since gone back and watched parts of Dynamite through YouTube TV. And to me, picture quality and sound was significantly better on Max. Now, if you're a psycho, like I said at the start of the show, who like actively just looks for ways to shit on the competition or to shit on the promotion you don't follow, you're going to love the fact that like the ratings for Dynamite are probably going to be low unless Nielsen is somehow incorporating the streaming numbers on Max. Now, in fairness, they've been able to do that for the NFL on Netflix. They were able to for Christmas Day. If Nielsen is somehow able to kind of tie in the streaming numbers on Max, well, then I would assume that the overall viewership is going to be up. But if they can't tie Max in, the number is going to probably look bad on TBS because a lot of people like me said, all right, well, let's see what Max looks like. Now, they didn't have picture-in-picture on Max. You got full video and audio commercials, which felt very old school. In fairness, I don't really care about picture-in-picture all that much. Usually, I view those as a lot of rest spots. Sometimes you do get like a little bit of action, and you get to see the heels kind of taking control until they come back from commercial, and then the baby face starts to heat up. But like, it was worth it. The video quality and the audio quality was fantastic. They tried different camera angles. I think the production looked significantly better in the first show of 2025 than it did at the end of 2024. We'll see what it looks like week over week. Are we going to see picture-in-picture next week on Max? Is there a reason that they had to go full screen ads? It might have to do with dynamic ad insertion. I have no idea. But we'll see. I will say positive first episode of Dynamite. And I would even go back as far, because I mentioned earlier, I want to get into Rated FTR and I want to get into this Okada Omega thing. I would argue that World's End was a sensational pay-per-view until the main event, which really did kind of bring the overall value of the show down at least a little bit. Now, in fairness, like there have been pay-per-views in the past that AEW's done that have been really good pay-per-views, and then you get to the end, and like the exploding barbed wire death match happens, and it goes out with a pop, pop, fizz, fizz. And you're like, oh boy, that is about the worst thing that could have happened. And it kind of puts a damper on the entire show. World's End was great. World's End, the only complaint I had is that no champion lost their title. And so in a way, you're kind of like left wanting a little bit. Because Takeshita puts his title on the line. He retains. Okada goes through the semifinal and the final of the Continental Classic. He ultimately retains. Moxley retains. Mercedes retains. Mariah May retains. MJF defends, quote unquote, defends the Dynamite Diamond Ring, and he maintains it. So you're kind of left with this like weird thing where you're like, all right, it was a great show and matches were excellent, but like you typically expect there to be a title change, at least one. Now, I'm going to start with the thing that got me excited. And I have to go with the frame of reference here that like when I first found AEW, when I found out that it was going to happen, I did not know who Okada was. I did not know that Okada had previously worked for TNA. I did not know who Kenny Omega was. And so it took me a little bit to get used to this idea that these two went out and had these classic matches in Japan that I had never seen before. But boy, I'm excited about this. Now, do I think it's a smart play by AEW to have Kenny Omega return as an EVP on a show where the Young Bucks aren't present, have Christopher Daniels come out and say, I'm not an EVP anymore, but this guy is. Omega hands the Continental Championship to Okada, who then holds it up in Omega's face. Do I think that it's the best way to set it up? I don't know. The thing that I'm actually concerned about is what you can see in this image. The camera cuts to All In Texas. And what is the problem with that? The show doesn't happen until July 12th. So you're looking at like a 6.5 month wait between the pay-per-view and like when these two are actually supposed to go toe-to-toe. At least that's what they've alluded to. Now, if Omega and Okada are going to headline that show, or they're going to be like the co-main event, it's going to be a great match. It's going to be one of those dream matches that Tony Khan loves so much, and that AEW fans love, and I certainly will appreciate, and I'll enjoy. But a 6.5 month build seems like a long wait. And then you go, okay, well, maybe Omega's not ready to return, except that's not the case, because the thing that ultimately, if you go 10,000 foot view, the thing that hurt World's End, and the reason that so many champions presumably retained their titles, is because a bunch of them are committed to Wrestle Dynasty on January 5th at New Japan. So Kenny Omega's first match back, after having diverticulitis and having to have surgery and being out for an extended period of time, his first match isn't going to be in AEW. It's against Gabe Kidd at a New Japan show that presumably is not going to have that as the headline main event. So, like, I have a hard time with it. I have a hard time if you are an EVP of a company, you've been out all this time, your first match back is with New Japan. I don't get it. And I like Omega a lot. I have grown to appreciate the fact that, like, Omega wrestles a very different style than a lot of guys I've been a fan of in the past. I enjoy and I can appreciate Omega. I can certainly appreciate Will Ospreay. I could certainly appreciate Kyle Fletcher. Omega's great. Okada, his best match probably was in this Continental Classic final. I would say this was his best match since he signed with AEW. There have been matches that I've watched Okada and been like, I don't totally get the hype. Because I know that these two have put on classics, and I know the way that people have talked about Okada in his time in New Japan. What I have seen, at least initially in AEW, has been kind of underwhelming. But then you get the Continental Classic final, and you get Okada versus Ospreay, and then all of a sudden, I get it. And so conceptually, I get why Omega versus Okada again could be a big draw, and why it's more than just being a dream match. Now, do I think that setting up 6.5 months from now is the best call? Probably not. Do I think that this should have ended the show? Oh, I do. I definitely do. I'm going to explain why here in a second. And that, my friends, leads me to the thing that is the most perplexing, and the thing that I wish I could appreciate, and I wish I felt the same way about when I first saw it, and that is the Death Riders saga. Because, how do I put this? There have been times... Okay. Let's go a little bit macro. There are plenty of storylines that have been recycled through time. One of the things that gets called out the most is that Shawn Michaels books parts of NXT based on his own career. And there have been times where we've seen somewhat recycled storylines, and there have been times where on WWE and on AEW, we've seen them recycle similar plot points or plot progressions, even within the context of the same show, like similar finishes to matches even on the same show. In 2024, someone decided that the fans were going to care more about AEW and perhaps come back to the product. Come back. If you care about ratings, that more people were going to come back if they felt like the soul of AEW was being stolen. If somebody had a dastardly thought and it was going to bring back fans who may have lapsed or fans who may have left the product for a little bit to say, you know what? I want to see AEW succeed. I want to see AEW. How dare the Young Bucks attack Tony Khan? How dare Jungle Boy? How dare Jack Perry? He's not going to be Jungle Boy anymore. He's a jungle man. How dare they attack Tony Khan? Tony Khan wears the neck brace to the NFL draft, which I actually thought was pretty funny. That happens. And it's, the Young Bucks are trying to steal the company. They're trying to take over the company. And that story fizzled. Like, pretty quickly, it fizzled. Now, those guys were EVPs, and, there was a way to book that storyline. AEW chose to go a way that made little to no sense. And Jack Perry was driving around a camper van thing. That was interesting. And then Okada was showing up in a Lamborghini and had the hots from Mercedes Moné. And, whole lot of things with that storyline that just didn't totally make sense. I've since seen, late in 2024, the Young Bucks did an interview where they said that they intentionally weren't wrestling their style because they wanted people to feel like they couldn't wrestle anymore. So presumably when they go and wrestle their next match at Wrestle Dynasty for New Japan, they're going to look like the Young Bucks of old, assuming they get rid of this whole EVP gimmick thing that they were doing. But, okay, so that didn't work. Bryan Danielson goes off. He wins the world title at All In. And then they decide that what's best for business is not to have Danielson drop the title to a rising star or to a day one homegrown guy like a Darby Allin, which had been rumored, or the hot free agent in Will Ospreay, or even to have, Swerve retain it All In. They put the belt on Danielson, and then ultimately, who dethrones Danielson but Jon Moxley, who betrays him and put the plastic bag over his face, and they look to end Danielson's career. And Danielson's been off TV, but for some reason they had him at the All In Texas press conference, which to me kind of kills some of the vibe around the whole program. It doesn't matter. That's not being critical to be critical. It's just kind of weird. But okay. Moxley and the former BCC now become the Death Riders. And for a few weeks, it felt like, they're going the outsiders route here. They come in through the crowd, which the BCC did, but they come through the crowd. There's no music. There's nothing up on the Tron. They are rogue, and for some reason, Tony Khan lets them talk, presumably because Moxley has the title in a briefcase. Now, again, if you're supposed to kind of follow all of this logic, even in kayfabe, CM Punk attacks Jack Perry prior to going out to his match at All In, yells in Tony Khan's face, and Tony Khan says, "I feared for my life," probably to try to void the deal, would be my guess, would be the legal advice. So that feared for the life. The Young Bucks in kayfabe attacking Tony Khan doesn't lead to them being fired, and they never explain fully why they weren't fired. Oh, and now Moxley goes and puts a plastic bag over Danielson's face, attempts murder, presumably, and is still employed. Khan doesn't fear for his life. Okay, fine. The Death Riders thing felt interesting at first, and then something happened, and I have not seen enough people make the parallel argument. This shit happened last year. Well, it happened in 2023. What closed out 2023? The Devil storyline that we said, initially, somebody in a devil mask and a group of people. They had a backstage attack. Oh, that's interesting. And then it carried on for weeks and weeks, and weeks became months, and all of a sudden, people said, I just want it to be over. This feels like the Black Scorpion. This isn't going to end well, is it? And then ultimately, Adam Cole shatters his ankle. It kind of kills the entire program. And the Undisputed Kingdom eventually, like, Wardlow gets hurt. The whole thing kind of fizzles out. MJF also gets hurt. Wrestling Samoa Joe, I think it was, right? Hurts his hip, hurts his shoulder. Then he misses time. And that whole thing goes on ice. And now it just got resolved, in theory, at World's End 2024, at the end of the calendar year. But that whole Devil storyline, that carried on too long. The Death Riders thing has carried on too long. There should have been a resolution at this point. And if the idea is, Moxley, that dastardly fellow, he put the belt in a briefcase. He's not even letting us see the belt. He did cut a promo post-World's End that they showed on Dynamite on Wednesday where he's like, I'm going to melt it down. I'm going to melt down the belt. Why? I'm going to melt it down. Why? Why are you melting down the belt? AEW paid you a lot of money. Why do you hate AEW now? And the best part, or the worst part, depending on how you view it, is that on commentary at World's End, this question about, what do they want? JR never holds back. He's an older fellow, and there are times where he points out the logical gaps in the program. What does Jon Moxley want out of this? Why is he taking this? What does he want? And then you get Shivani and Excalibur go, well, he wants to see AEW molded in his image. What is that? What does that mean? It hasn't been clearly articulated. There have been a lot of riddles. There have been a lot of promos. There have been a lot of, word salads. But what exactly do the Death Riders want exactly? They have gold. They have the trios titles. They have the World Championship. Marina Shafir has not gotten into a program for the TBS title or for the Women's World Championship. She's not challenged Mercedes for the New Japan Strong Championship. She's not challenged Athena, to my knowledge, for the Ring of Honor Women's Championship. So why isn't she going after gold? No one seems to know. What do the Death Riders want? We are weeks, months into the storyline, and no one seems to have an idea what these guys want. And it feels like those segments pull down the show. Because if these guys are really as dangerous and awful as we're made to believe they are, why do they have a theme song? And why do they have something showing up on the Tron when they wrestle? That doesn't make sense. Why would Tony Khan not have suspended them? Why would he not have potentially fired them? Why does it appear that he just condones their actions, including weeks ago trying to pour a chemical, like a bleach or something, down Orange Cassidy's throat backstage that FTR saved him from? What are we doing here? You could make logical leaps, right? You can certainly play the mental game of subverting reality and saying, all right, when you attempt to kill a guy with a plastic bag on a pay-per-view like Moxley did, well, it happened in wrestling, so he didn't actually mean to kill him, and you just have to accept that. Okay, fine. But again, why is Moxley's gang doing what they're doing? So this all leads to the end of World's End, because the match is a mess. The four-way match is a total mess, and I think we all kind of knew that it was going to be a mess going in. Jay White feels like they're heating him up, finally. It actually does feel like Jay White is building to a potential world championship program, or at least being taken more seriously. They did their thing with Orange Cassidy, who I just never believed to be a credible threat for that title. And then Hangman is Hangman. And it certainly feels like there are times that the fans just want Hangman to go back to being a babyface, but they're doing this heel thing. I commend them for it. Hangman and Swerve was the rivalry of the year in AEW. You could argue that it was up there with Punk and McIntyre for the best rivalry in all of pro wrestling in 2024. But my problem is this. We all knew how that four-way match was going to end. And now me, being whatever I am, I guess I forgot that four-way matches are no DQ. I know that the triple threat rules in AEW are no DQ. I guess forgot that happens in four-way matches. And then I start wondering, why are the Death Riders just allowed to do whatever they want? And then you get some neutralizing of them because some of the good guys from the back come out. They take down, they neutralize the Death Riders, but then Moxley ultimately wins. And going into World's End, we had been told, it's going to be a new era. It's going to be a new era. You won't want to miss the show. You won't want to miss what happens. As I said earlier, no championships nor the Dynamite Diamond Ring changed hands. So then, with that in mind, I'm watching the main event going, Moxley's probably not going to lose, but something big has to happen at the end. Now, am I one of the psychos who was like, oh, Shane McMahon, that could be interesting. Perhaps that'd be good for their overall business. Perhaps that would be an interesting authority figure who's actually been dictating this entire time to Moxley and the Death Riders. That could be interesting. So did I allow myself on the night of World's End to sit back and go, oh, maybe this is where Shane McMahon shows up. Perhaps this is the time where things get interesting with the Death Riders. Yeah, I let myself think that. I did. Which is what made the ending of it, and then subsequently what happened on Dynamite even more perplexing, because at the end of World's End, we don't get a Shane McMahon or a reveal about there being somebody that's been dictating to Mox. We get the return of Adam Copeland, who apparently now goes by the Rated R Superstar Cope. Whatever. People got upset about it. I don't care. Cope. His new phrase obviously should be cope with it. Or just telling people cope. He did the Cope Open last year as TNT champ. We'll see. He likes being called Cope. That's fine. Okay. So he comes back at World's End, and I'm like, oh, okay. Rekindles this thing with FTR. Now they're rated FTR. That's pretty cool. I liked CMFTR. I like FTR a lot. They want to be rated FTR. Fine by me. No problem. But then I go, okay, now you have Copeland comes back, and now he's going to be the guy challenging Moxley. All right, they've never been in a match together, but like I do very much view Copeland as a former WWE guy. And like, yes, Moxley has been there since the first pay-per-view when he came out through the crowd and took out both Omega and Jericho, but like, there's still very much a Dean Ambrose when I see Jon Moxley, and you may disagree with that, but like, I do still view both of these guys as being former WWE guys. And I felt like in a year where you've done this great job of kind of building up Will Ospreay, but also having him lose some matches so he's not infallible. That was good. Swerve became a next-level superstar. Kyle Fletcher, I felt like, was really going the right direction, and I question him losing at least in the semifinal of the C2, if not, the fact that he didn't win the whole thing. I thought that there might have been a way to kind of build a Fletcher up a little bit more. But now we're going to get Copeland versus Moxley, which isn't a bad program. And in theory, FTR against like Claudio and Yuta is interesting. And maybe they're going to bring Beth Phoenix in. Maybe Beth Phoenix is going to be the foil to Marina Shafir. I don't know. But this to me was kind of like, I'm fine with the idea of rated FTR going after the trios titles and taking that off of Moxley's crew. That's totally fine. I just don't totally understand why this is the direction they went at the end of the pay-per-view. And this certainly, to me, didn't fulfill the idea of like, you need to see the show because everything's about to change. This, to me, didn't feel like everything's about to change. Oh, by the way, that main event was also messed because you had Christian Cage and his cronies up in a box that was kind of taking away from the match, and then Hook over in another box, and it just felt like it was a very overbooked mess, and I kept waiting for something to happen, and it didn't. So you fast forward to Dynamite, and rated FTR gets the win, and now it looks like, maybe the tide is starting to swing in the favor. The pendulum is swinging in the direction of AEW being able to defend itself against the Death Riders. But I once again come back to this. Defend them from what? And what do the Death Riders want? And why hasn't that been clearly articulated? And saying that you're sick of the greed or the vanity of some of AEW's talent or the ego, what does that look like? And why does it matter? And why, as a fan, should anyone care? Like, it's one thing to be in your own insular bubble, and it's another to say, like, all right, you could really like the promotion, but, like, do you live and die with it? No. If AEW shut down tomorrow, I would be sad, more for the talent, but I would be, like, bummed because I still enjoy the product, even though it's very hit or miss. But, like, I don't feel an emotional tie to the idea that, like, Jon Moxley's going to tear at the heart of AEW. And that's supposed to, like, be a weight that I carry around with me for an entire week or a few days until Collision, and I see if AEW gets its comeback. Like, I don't know. I don't get it. Now, CMFTR is great. Totally fine with them. And I'm totally fine with them going after the trios titles. Do I need to see an Adam Copeland title run with the World Championship? No, not necessarily. Would it be interesting if they had their match? Moxley and Copeland are both down. Copeland's about to get the win. Christian Cage cashes in his contract, and Christian Cage wins the title, and that sets up Copeland versus Christian. That would be interesting. But then, like, is that really a definitive end to the Death Riders? And then how do you write Moxley off TV or the Death Riders off TV based on that? And it certainly feels like they're trying to build this thing back up to be like a Darby takes the belt off of Moxley. So, like, there are questions I have. And by the way, you know, Swerve kind of noted in his promo on Dynamite that he's eyeing up the title again. Then he gets taken out by a very believable heel, Ricochet, who had toilet paper thrown at him at the Hammerstein Ballroom, and then had it thrown at him again at World's End. He comes out with the big scissors, and that's a gruesome sight. That's interesting. But Swerve, you know, says that he has his eyes on the title. He's about to get into a great feud, it appears like, with Ricochet. MJF cuts a promo that airs on Dynamite where he says he's going back after the Triple B, and he calls out Moxley. Okay, I like the idea of multiple challengers for the title or multiple stars having their eyes on the title. To this point, you have Copeland, Christian, Swerve, and MJF all publicly acknowledging they're going to go after it. Presumably when Samoa Joe comes back, he will have eyes on the title as well. You would assume that at some point this year, Ospreay is going to make his intentions known. Oh, and by the way, if Danielson ever comes back, does Danielson want the title or does he just want Moxley's head? To me, that's actually the better play. If reports are to be believed, Danielson never wanted the title in the first place. I could see him wanting Moxley's head more so than wanting that championship. But okay, you have multiple challengers lining up for this champion again. And as I mentioned earlier, Switchblade looks like they're kind of putting him in position to have a nice little run here, to have a main event run. So when I kind of say negative things about AEW, I can just as easily flip to the positive and say they have multiple believable challengers for a world title. I still think they have too many secondary belts. I think WWE does too. But I think on AEW, it's even more pronounced because they don't have a roster split. There are too many secondary titles. I would love to see them combine the Continental and the TNT, or the Continental and the International. Like, let's get back to titles feeling important. Let's keep Ring of Honor titles away from AEW TV. Let's go back to the early days where if you go now and you watch shows from 2019 available on Max, when there were limited titles, they felt even more special. They don't right now. If you ask somebody really quickly, which belt does Takeshita have? Some will get it right away, but you also might be as apt to say the Continental as the International, or the TNT as the Continental, or the TNT as the International. There are too many secondary belts. You don't need them. Another positive that came out of World's End that you can build on is Statlander and Mercedes have incredible chemistry in the ring and should absolutely have a third match, and maybe a fourth and maybe a fifth. They seem to have found a combo that works there. And Tony Storm is doing some of the best character work of anyone on pro wrestling TV in North America. Okay, see, there are positives. There are positives. Now, I'll be back next Thursday, and I'll be doing the show live at 8:30 a.m. Eastern. So if you want to get in the conversation live, and maybe you'll help to dictate where we go with the show next week, by all means, you should. This show is available on YouTube, X, and Facebook. It's Just Wrestling. You can see the logo on the screen or in your podcast, wherever you are. You can see the logo, subscribe to the channel. And if you like podcasts, you can certainly subscribe to the podcast feed. That's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, and Amazon Music, wherever you get your podcasts. Now, this show over time might change. I will be doing a weekly show, live show, every Thursday morning at 8:30 a.m. Is it possible that I could mix in a couple of other episodes within a week? If something really big happens, let's say on a Friday, and I'm like, oh, I have to talk about that before waiting an entire week. Or if something huge happens on that first Monday Night Raw on Netflix, is it possible that I could do a post-show or like one on a Tuesday? It's possible. But for now, I at least don't want to overpromise. And what I am confident in promising right now is a weekly show every Thursday morning, live on YouTube, X, and Facebook. If you haven't done so already, go follow the show. Subscribe where you get your podcasts. You can see my handle if you want to argue about things on Twitter, on Instagram, at JoyOnBroad. And when the show rolls out, you'll see all the social media platforms where this show can be found as well. So I want to thank all of you for joining me on this reincarnation of sorts, this restart, and a serious start here on It's Just Wrestling. Until next week, or whenever I see fit before then, I'm Russ Joy. I'll talk to all of you next week here on It's Just Wrestling. Have a great week, everybody.